our webinar talking about inside real estate development, structuring compliance projects in Nigeria's evolving regulatory landscape. I'm going to go ahead and introduce our panel session, but we're going to first have a presentation from testimony Asegun Mute from Spacecube Construction, who is also one of our panelists this afternoon. And then afterwards, I'll do an introduction for the panel session after the presentation by testimony. So testimony, good afternoon. You can go ahead and start your presentation.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, testimony.
So, thank you for the opportunity to present this to this wonderful audience. We're talking about structuring compliance projects in Nigeria's sorry about that, please. We're talking about structuring. I need to turn on my camera. Apologies, please. Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, we can see your video now. Thanks.
All right, thank you. So we're talking about structuring compliant projects in Nigeria's evolving regulatory landscape. And I just want to briefly give us a prelude based on our experience, and hopefully that helps drive this conversation. We're Spacecube Construction Limited, and we've done in the past few years almost a decade now. We've worked across Nigeria, and we've seen that in working as both a construction company and as a development company across Nigeria, you need regulatory agility. The regulatory framework in each state seems to be very different. Of course, Lagos State leading in terms of significant planning permits and stakeholder management is very, very significant in Lagos. Then, of course, a few other states, Ogun State is doing quite well, FCT, and a few other places where we've built or we currently have projects. So I'll give you a case study. We have an ongoing project in Yaba where we led the planning phase, and in planning that phase, it's a multi-residential apartment that's different residences. We had significant delayed approvals and significant administrative issues. Our approvals were delayed for almost 8 months, if I remember well. So the building permits did not come out in time. And it's not because the design needed to change. It's not because the land was not suitable for the development. We had carried out some of those things, preliminary checks earlier. But we had a number of issues, and I highlight some of those issues. But this is just to show you a real-life case study. We had social issues with complex dynamics with existing occupants, the community and stakeholders. Of course, we call some of them homoniles. But beyond homoniles, we also had issues with people who were occupying. Now, you know, when you leave your land vacant, like people say, there's no vacuum in nature. When you leave your land vacant, somebody is going to occupy that land. The question is, who is it going to be, and are they going to be your friends? Are they going to be partners in progress? So they had some people living and working on that site, and it delayed the ability of the developer with whom we're partnered to move to site. I don't want to dwell too much on that, but you can already imagine the complex dynamics involved in getting someone off your own land and having to pay settlement and all of that, apart from the regular moneyless. And of course, tax assessment. So thankfully, we are all very aware of the new tax regime in Nigeria. And at that time, the people who were partnered with had to submit individual tax assessments, and it was complicated. And long story short, that significantly delayed the movement to site. So this is pre-planning phase. The second case study, litigation. This is a private guest house in Ogun State. So it's partially residence, but it's also it's a guest house for a private individual. We faced the aftermath of litigation, long-standing litigation involving a neighboring religious organization. So the location is somewhere that the government had previously given C of O, and then the estates bought land. It's a bit of a messy thing, and they all took each other to court, and they returned. They had all of the documents, but we could not get certain approvals because there was long-standing litigation, and after that litigation, you had to go and meet this organization to enforce the judgment and all of that. So these are things you see in Nigeria on a daily basis. And of course, the person through his legal advisor got some concession from the government, and of course, we're able to build this that you see here. All right, so as we say on our social media page, these are the issues. These are the issues. What are the issues with the regulatory landscape in Nigeria? Number one, ever-changing regulations. I'll give you a simple example. In a particular state, I don't want to go into too many details because it will elongate the conversation, but in a particular state, many of the land in a certain location, all of their COs have been, I would not call it revoked, but they tell people to come back for revalidation, which means if you want to get approval, you have to revalidate your COO. That's what is currently happening in that particular state. And so zoning laws change very quickly. A lot of places in that place, for example, along the expressway leading to the capital and leading to a very important hub, the land use is now industrial, whereas it used to be mixed for industrial, residential, and the likes. So when you are doing your planning as a developer or as a person who wants to construct your own building, you need to be in touch with those realities. The solution, initiating formal dialogue with planning authorities. So what we do in Spacecube, we have these people who we liaise with within the planning authority of different states, and of course we are able to, we typically just send, in simple English, we send our drawings. Well, not drawings, because you can't detail your drawings and then do the back and forth. You understand how complicated that can be, but we basically initiate the conversation before we go for formal approval. Issue 2, administrative bottlenecks, manual processing, stalling. There's an average 6-month delay period, statistically speaking, for Lagos, and I have experienced it. We have experienced it. Lagos State in particular, again, because it's the busiest state. In a few states, you can get your approvals in 2 weeks, to be fair to them. In some states, they don't even bother to approve your plan. You'll be the one chasing them. There's a state where we're building a hotel, we had to literally chase down the approval authorities, and they told us they were not even in the office to start with. So these are challenges that you would experience, and sometimes you have to understand that some of these agencies are short-staffed. To the credit of the government of Lagos State, they are leading in terms of using technology to get approvals. They just opened a GIS facility, as you are aware, about 2 weeks ago, or it's almost 2 weeks this week. And so that should help to manage those things. Historical title gaps. So this is the third issue. What we do, many land assets in Nigeria suffer from incomplete perfection or perfecting, as we call it, of old documentation. Some of you would have try to get things in places like Yaba, Ikoyi, and you'd see that there is the Lagos land certificate versus the current land system. So land administration systems keep shifting. And with this new digital system, of course, it has shifted again. As a matter of fact, survey plans need to be revalidated in Lagos, Ogun, and a few other states every decade. Whereas some people's grandparents still hold documents from the 80s or even the 50s and 60s. So you can imagine the challenge there. Institutionalized legal desk. So we have, of course, our legal team here with ULaw and UUBO. They helped us to sort some of these things with one of our developments in Oyo State. And these are the ways we prevent some of these challenges. Conducting rigorous historical, physical, statutory audits. I'm sure we're all aware of some of these things. Next issue is stakeholder relations. Community engagement is very critical before you begin the work. I said you need to work with the local security, because the people that will steal your, let me say, for example, steal your rebars or some of your construction materials, they are the people in the community. So you need to, especially if you have a large project, like a farm and estate, for example, you need to already have buy-in with the community for the long term, right? So that you don't encounter some of these challenges. Issue 5 is over-regulation. Now, we're talking about 8 agencies in Lagos State, for example. You know, the Lagos State Ministry of Physical Planning and Urban Development has about 6 agencies under it. Then the Ministry of Environment will come to you. Kick Against Indiscipline will come to you. You know, all of those agencies come there. There's the Safety Board, Safety Commission, sorry, and so on and so forth. And you need to satisfy all of their requirements. And God help you if you want to build a factory. You now need to talk about NAFDAC, federal agencies, and so forth. So some of these things affect our excellence. And of course, multi-agency overlap creates enforcement fatigue. And that's why sometimes you see that somebody builds something and say, why did they approve this? Because the right agency approved it, but there are other agencies that should have partnered with them that did not. How we do it at Spacecube Construction Limited, dialogue, like I said earlier, we do our best to work. Before we do actual work, we go, so we have an estate we're working on right now. And in fact, let me talk about the previous one. We're going to do something around Mowe in Ogun State, and we spent months. We, in fact, had the people from Ministry of the Town Planning Ministry come over to that site to be sure that that number of floors would be allowed in that location. And that was when we found out about revalidation of COO, and stakeholder engagement was very, very funny. And some of these things are the reasons why houses are expensive and people, you know, wonder. So in the beginning phase, we already figured those things out. And of course, at some point, we decided to stall with that particular one. And of course, post-occupancy, there are challenges you need to prepare for. I think we'll talk about those at the question and answer phase. So yes, if you have questions, you can share the questions with us. The email here is cc@spacecubeafrica.com, not info. So if you have questions, we'll be happy to take them in the course of this session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Testimony, for that presentation. Very insightful, and we thought it was important to have a presentation ahead of the panel session so that our attendees have an understanding of the way real estate development works before you then have the panel session going into the various questions for each panelist to then provide responses on. A couple of things I got from your presentation is that you cannot overemphasize the importance of complying with the regulatory considerations for your development. It can literally make or break your construction development, and it means that the money you've expended, right, in that project can just be lost if you don't regard those considerations as important. We also emphasized on stakeholder engagement. Like that's very important. You have to speak to all the various stakeholders, even to the homeowners, because they can also it can be a huge stumbling block to completing your project. So there's no stakeholder that is unimportant, right, when you're doing a real estate development. So we'll be going to the panel session right about now. And I want to introduce each of the panelists. I'll start for myself. My name is Anu Odunaike. As I said before, I am your moderator for today. I am a senior associate in Udodoma Belosage and ULaw. I'll just implore the presenters to please switch on their videos so that when I introduce you, then everybody can see you on the screen. So I work in the real estate, private equity, merger acquisitions, and general corporate advisory practice areas, practice groups in Udodoma, Belasagi, and ULaw. And I'll start from testimony. We've already heard from him this afternoon, but testimony, Ashegun Mute is the managing director of Spacecube Construction Limited, a leading construction company here in Nigeria. And he oversees a multidisciplinary team delivering sustainable projects across more than 50 developments across Nigeria. And he also founded Snag Inspector, which is a platform that promotes quality control in terms of doing constructions, and they're very popular on Instagram. I'm sure that one or two of us, or more than that, have come across the Snag Inspector page, and they're known for highlighting and outlining what you need to do in order to deliver a quality or a good construction or a good development. And he's also the co-founder and general secretary of Rainy Day Cooperative Society, where he supports economic empowerment by encouraging savings and collective investment. Then we also have construction finance Cutstruct. We have Dr. Olo Omunu Eze Afiororo, who is the vice president of Cutstruct. He is a construction finance executive and infrastructure specialist with over 18 years of experience delivering projects across the full infrastructure value chain. And as VP, he has led work spanning consulting, advisory roles within infrastructure finance institutions, and collaborations with various international development donors. Welcome, Dr. Eze. And then from Udodoma and Belosage / ULaw, we have Mujib Aziz, who is an associate with over 4 years of experience in real estate and banking and finance, and also part of the Spacecube team. And I'm very happy to see Mujib here. So he'll be giving us legal guidance on the questions I'll be posing to the panel today on how you should structure compliance projects when you're doing a real estate development. So welcome all our panelists, testimony, Dr. Eze, Mujib. I just want you to give me a thumbs up or a wave that you can hear me, and we're good to go and get straight into the panel session. Great. Dr. Eze? Yeah. Okay, great. All right. So to start the panel session, we're going to, so in terms of the order of questions, we have different phases for the way a real estate development progresses. So when you're starting a real estate development, you have your deal origination / early decision making phase, which is the first phase of your transaction. So under this phase for Spacecube, when you first have a project acquisition or development, when it first comes across on your table as managing director of Spacecube, what is the first issue that you would see that you'll be like, okay, maybe I can't do this deal, or is a red flag to you? And then where do you think that developers most often get like judgment wrong? Because sometimes you see some developments and you'd be like, this should never have been approved, this should never have been done. So what are the red flags that you see from when you are in the deal origination phase and you'd be like, okay, either we can't do this deal, we need to walk away, or then what do we then do to resolve those issues? So if you just answer the question from those two perspectives, that would be great.
All right. Thank you very much, Anu, and thank you, everyone. the primary concern or the primary red flag, if I can use colloquial terms, is when I'm looking for a simple word for it, but when I see that the fundamentals are not right. When I say fundamentals, I mean it's real estate. So we're talking, before even going into deep due diligence, I mean the basic due diligence where, for example, your land is just by, let's use the coastal road that is popular, for example, or the Lagos-Ibadan Expressway. If your land is smack on the expressway, there's already a problem. It tells me that you, with all due respect, don't know what you're doing. Now, if your land is smack on the express and you have 50 acres or 50 hectares inside, okay, I understand that. But if you want to do something with 3,000 square meters, for example, you're set back from every national highway, every power grid, transmission line, and canal is at least 9 meters, and in some cases up to 30 meters. So if 30 meters is gone and you have about 5,000 square meters, what are you doing? Are you designing a playing ground? You get, so I think that's the fundamental. That's the starting point. Not getting your fundamentals and your location right before we even now talk about doing proper due diligence on the title documents and all that. Location has to make sense. There is also the factor of, which is also still location, but the environment, meaning there are environments where you know that there are certain concerns at the moment. So if there are environmental concerns about that place, for example, you are building, you are proposing to us that you want to, I'll give specific examples much later, but let me just give this one. You're proposing that you want to do something around a dumping ground. I mean, somewhere where there's a lot of waste. I have to know that what you are doing is going to benefit the environment and, of course, manage the people around there. So the common example is the refineries around us. A lot of persons want to build around the refineries, and we've gotten offers to either buy or, I mean, as you know, we're to construct agriculture as well, apart from this thing. And you get people offering us land in certain places where you know that the waste, the organic waste in that place or inorganic waste, whatever it is going to damage either the farm or the health of the people. So those factors are fundamentals before we even go into deep due diligence. Those things are the first red flags. Thank you.
Thank you very much, testimony. That flows into the question for Mujib. When you're doing a legal due diligence perspective, from a due diligence perspective, what are the red flags that you look out for? Because testimony has said the things that you look out for from a construction perspective. So from a legal due perspective, what are the red flags you look out for?
So from a due diligence perspective, legal due diligence perspective, what we look out for the title issues, root of title issues. We look out for government acquisition issues, and we also look out for physical planning and zoning requirements. And these are usually the recurring issues, and that's why we focus on them. When we talk about root of title issues, you think of it in terms of the title, the current title you have as the tree. And for every tree, of course, you need the roots. So the root must be strong and as strong as a tree for you to validly, acquire a property. The reality, as I see it in real estate today, is that many developers, they tend to focus on the existence of documents rather than interrogating what the history of the chain of transfer in the document. Who acquired this property? Did the person have a valid title at the point of acquiring the property? And before it got to me, has it been clean? Has it been valid? Has it been sound legally as root of title? And I'm going to give you a common example, is the over-reliance of real estate developers on certificates of occupancy. If you ask any real estate developer which property is the safest buy, they probably will tell you a property covered by a certificate of occupancy. That is, after, of course, after this land is close to Dangote refinery. So when they when they tell you things like that, the general thinking is that a certificate of occupancy is a document that cures all past, present, and future problems of a property. But that is not the case. The reality is that a certificate of occupancy is mere evidence that a title is issued in the name of the current holder. So it doesn't defeat a superior title if you have, people that have strong title without having a CFO. The court will most likely look and declare in their favor. So we need to understand that it's not about certificate of occupancy. You need to interrogate the chain of transmission, from where the property was acquired, how the property was transferred, was it validly transferred, and was it perfected? So that's how you get to know that, okay, this is a risk, that you start thinking about it early. It's not just about the documents, it's about the validity of the document, the history of the transfer. And so the second point is really the government acquisition. You have properties in Lagos where since 2018, 2019, the Lagos state government has compulsorily acquired those properties for public interest, and they've committed those properties for that particular purpose. In 2018, I'm aware that the Lagos state government compulsorily acquired some properties in Roxton Road in Ikoyi, in Epe, some parts of Yanopaja, in Agege, and I think I mentioned Oworoshoki for particular purposes. These are not questions you get answers to at the lands registry. You have to ask them at the office of the Surveyor General to say, look, this is a property I want to acquire. Is it under, committed acquisition or an acquisition corridor? And you get an answer to that. Because if you go and you acquire a property that's under committed acquisition, you've not acquired any property. And so lastly, another risk that we look out for is planning and zoning risk, and it's interesting because it's starting to surface now that most states are very, very deliberate and intentional about urban renewal and the future of their cities. Primary cities like Lagos, secondary cities also, Calabar, Port Harcourt, they are going very aggressive on enforcement of planning and zoning requirements. And you have to understand that master plans for cities and right-of-ways, they exist for a reason. They exist for a reason. And if you fail to consider, zoning, whether it's used for, is designated for residential purposes, industrial purposes, commercial purposes, agricultural, recreational, all of these purposes, and you buy a property, you end up losing the property. Well, you will still have your legal title to it, but you cannot construct whatever it is you want to construct. So you need to have an alignment of the purpose with the law. So that is where the due diligence on planning and zoning requirements comes in. Mr. Asegumote has mentioned the coastal road, the demolitions on coastal road affected landmark. You also have the ones going on in Lekki Aja, close to the canal side. And you have the ones that are going on in Abuja as well. So in Abuja, you cannot redesignate the use of a property. It's still possible in Lagos. You can apply for redesignation of the use, but you cannot do that in Abuja. So at the end of the day, these are the risks, the primary risk you have to consider. And you start to think that the reality for the developer is that they prioritize the existence of documents rather than depth of due diligence. And you can't blame them because the market forces them to be speedy in acquisition. But even when you want to speedily acquire a property, you have to calm down. and let the lawyers key in the lawyers early so that you avoid the stories that touch.
Thank you very much, Mujib, for your responses to that question. Dr. Eze, as a supply chain expert, when do you become important in decision making? Because we've talked about deal origination from developers' angle, we've talked about legal from your lawyer's perspective, but the Cutstruct is essentially in the business of construction materials. When do you become important in decision making? Do people need to come to you at the end or when they already finish their deal, or do they need to involve you from the beginning? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think the mistake most times is you start talking about your supply chain when you're already punching your budgets, you've gone to your financing, and then you begin to find a lot of program around it. But the peculiarity of our context as a country, price fluctuation, a lot of things that happen means that decision needs to happen at the point where you are planning, where you are still planning, where you are still even talking to the financing organization, where you are still building your financing model. Because at the end of the day, just like testimony said, one of the things you are looking for is location. And price is something that is very critical in making decisions in real estate. So if you are building, for example, let's say in Mowe, you are not going to sell at a price beyond what that market can absorb. And at the end of the day, when you look at your BOQ, it's actually materials. The BOQ feed, your BOQ, the bill of quantity actually determine the price when you add your profit, the price that you want to sell each unit. But that is actually material. Now, if you look at what happened in last 2-3 years when price of cement suddenly moved from 3,500 to 15,000. I remember I was on a project that have to ask for additional 2.5 billion, a project of 3 billion, because of those price increase. You could imagine what how that would affect the pricing. So for me, for what we do, the best time to make supply chain decision is at the point that you are planning. So just the way you are getting your architect to be on board, your structural engineers to be on board, you need to get your supply chain expert to be on board. So let's take a typical example. If you look at your pricing and you find out that a key component of your price the key drivers of your price, of your selling price, are materials that you are importing from outside the country. That is a supply chain decision. That's a supply chain strategy you need to make. Can you source for alternative material? Can you source materials in country? Where do you get them from? How would that even affect your delivery in terms of quality? Because at times, some of these local materials may have quality issues. The color scheme are not the same, are not uniform. How do you factor that into your design? So you need to get supply chain involved from the beginning. So the earlier you do that, the better. You don't need to wait for the middle point when your materials have been secured, where you now have issues. At that point, you are managing crisis. You're no longer managing the supply chain. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Eze. So this first phase, we've been able to establish that every part of the deal origination phase is important, from choosing the right location, making sure that the location you're picking is not a red flag from the beginning and the project is ultimately dead on arrival, to then considering all the legal due diligence issues, zoning, ensuring that what you are buying property for, you can actually use it. So in case you're buying a property that is designated or zoned as a commercial property, it means you can't leave it. You can't live there. It can't be residential, right? And vice versa. So that's something that we should also be very, very aware of, as well as from your supply chain. Very important for developers as well, because you need to involve them on time, not at the last moment. So I just wanted to mention before we move on to the next phase and next set of questions that if you have questions, you can go ahead and put them either in the Q&A or in the chat box, and then we'll deal with them once we round up after the panel session. So just put all your your questions. I've already seen some coming in, and then we'll deal with them at the end of the session. So for phase 2, that's your transaction structuring and deal alignment, and also essentially your documentation, negotiations with investors, or if you're partnering with another developer, negotiations with that, and also like stakeholder engagement as well. So for Spacecube, in your experience, what are the most common structures used for real estate developers? And then also, why is the reason that the structures are common? Why do developers / investors love them? So testimony.
Sorry. Thank you very much again. The structures that that are most common. Let me start with the most common. The most common is joint venture. Everybody advertises joint venture like it's pure water. I say this as someone that has been in. So yeah, I'm an architect by training, but I got into real estate just after school, and so I have quite an some experience in that, and I realized that a lot of people I don't know the year it started, but it got to a point where every real estate person just wanted a joint venture. So that's the number one structure. Of course, it looks easy on paper because give me land, I raise money and build for you, and everybody sells and we're happy. There are challenges with that. There are many substructures, if I can call them that, of joint ventures. So for example, there's I don't know if it's finance model, they call it, where there's one that I'm just a participant on that. It doesn't include Spacecube, but one of our partner companies, what they do is they get somebody as a funding partner and somebody else as the construction partner, and somebody else provides the land and so forth. So you have about 5 people splitting, maybe you build 8 floors, and that gives you maybe 300, I said 300, that gives you maybe 1,000 square meters or so, and then you now split it equally. So 200 square meters if it's office space, and if it's residential, you say you take 2 units and all of that. People like that because it feels very direct. It's easy to say your land is worth 50 million, so you get 50 million worth of the asset when the land is built. That's the joint venture structure. There's the long lease structure. This is very common in Yaba in particular, in Lagos. It's not common in other parts of the country. I know people have tried it, but it's not really, they've not really seen a lot of success. And I say this again with a bit of authority, having worked in Abuja, Lagos, Warri, and a few other places. But long lease basically means you say you take the land for 30 years or 20 years or something from family, you build it up, you finance the construction, and then you lease it out to some people or rent it or whatever. And after that tenure, after the tenure expires, it reverts to the family or the individuals or the corporation that owns it. It's not so successful, like I said, outside Lagos. It's very successful in what we call there's a name for it, but hotbeds, places where people are so desperate to find houses. So in Yaba, for example, I mean, you can build something as small as a prison room, and before you know it, they bought it from you. So there's that. And then there's a build, operate, transfer. That is a bit more common in other places in Nigeria. So families use it, corporations use it, institutions. So let me give you an example of institutions. I know a number of universities in Nigeria and tertiary institutions generally that use the BOT to build their hostel facilities, because obviously there's shortage of funds. So they use that to build their hostels, and after 25, 30 years, it reverts to the owner. There are popular structures in Nigeria. At the MMA airport, for example, that's the Murtala Mohammed 2. That's one of the most popular cases of build, operate, transfer. Those are the 3 shared models. And of course, there's a non-shared model where you outrightly buy your land, and then you build it. Either you sell it off plan, or you raise your funds and build to the end, and then you get people to buy. They all have their ups and downs, their advantages and disadvantages. Joint ventures in Nigeria, I would like to focus on that very briefly and say joint ventures are not realistic in Nigeria anymore, unfortunately. However, when you find a good one, it seems to be a very sensible way to develop assets without necessarily real estate assets without breaking the bank. So right now people are trying to do JVs and you have so many charges, they call something premium and all that. And thank God for our friends at UBO that help us a lot of times. I mean, we've sent them some things before and they say, oh, no, don't do this. But in cases where these things, where you find reasonable JVs, I would always, so someone is telling us, I mean, that's my partner, so 10% premium, for example, and then apart from that, you pay a finder's fee. Before you know that cost would lay the foundation of the building. So it's something that you need to be careful so that you find the structure that is realistic. I mean, you find the offer that is realistic, because many times people are not realistic with what they want out of their joint venture deals. Thank you. Yes, sorry, I wanted to mention that the sharing formulas on joint ventures, please, again, work with our lawyers. I beg you, work with our lawyers, work with you. You will see sharing formulas, you feel like crying. So please work with our lawyers, and then of course you avoid some of these strange JV offers. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Testimony. So JVs, honestly, we've seen a lot. There's always something. Conscious says demonic offers. To be honest, yes, and it's unfortunately the most popular out of like the structures you mentioned. Because most of the time when you see all of these developments, everybody's doing a JV, but whoever it is that has higher bargaining power, everybody just goes all out to milk as much as they can from it. So like as Testimony said, you need to have your lawyers behind you. Like we can also, obviously at ULO, we assist lots of real estate developers, construction companies in making the right decisions when it comes to structuring a development transaction. And even if you don't use those, please just use a lawyer, because there are so many hidden offers that will be included in your documentation that if you don't have a lawyer to review, you can end up signing up the entire profit you're supposed to make from the development away to the landowner or wherever, or the investor, as the case may be. So thank you very much, Testimony, for that insight. So for Mujib, what are the primary legal risks that are associated with these structures that Testimony has mentioned, and how can you mitigate them at structuring stage? What do developers need to put in place, and even investors, like what should they be putting in place? Because the price bleed is not only for the developers, also for the investors. When you're trying to buy units in a development, they're telling you you're going to pay this amount for perfection, you come and pay this other amount for premium, and other things are also included. They put all those hidden charges because the developer wants to shift all the losses that he has gotten over to the investor or the subsequent purchaser. So how do we deal with things like this at the structuring stage?
Okay, thank you very much. So I'll just answer this because he's mentioned a lot of structures, but I'll answer it a bit broadly. Now, what determines the risk really, it depends on the nature of the title, the purpose of the development, and the kind of relationship between the parties that are involved. And, a real estate developer must know where he stands in all of these variables. Now, to answer the question about what are the risks, I see three major risks. And the first one is the title risk, which I've discussed earlier. The second one is the structuring risk. And the third one is inadequate documentation. Now, I'm going to pick the title risk part again. If a real estate developer is not clear on the title risk, what happens is that they tend to pay more for problem properties. They tend to have leaner documentation, and they tend to throw their rights away. Now, I'm going to give you an example of a property in Lagos worth 4.2 billion naira. Now, the owner of the property had passed without a will, of course, and in the letters of administration, the property was not included, apparently for tax purposes. right? And our clients wanted to buy that property. So what did we do? We have to do something because the property is important to the client and there's a title risk. So what we did was to say, okay, this is how we're going to structure it. You execute the contract of sale agreement with the administrators of the estates. In the contract of sale, make the payment conditional upon some milestones. I mean, you're going to get 4.2 billion, right? But 35% at signing of the contract of sale, 35% once you include the property, once you start the application to include the property in the certificate of additional assets, then the balance of 30% when you are signing, you know, the deed of assignment and other perfection documents. And that way we were able to, you know, safeguard the client's interest, the client's commercial interest in the property. It's a prime property in Agege. It's useful for the clients and industry and industrial activities. So we have to do that. So another risk is inadequate documentation. And I think the mistake that most real estate developers make is that they assume or they forget that real estate and real estate development is a specialized kind of investment and it's a specialized kind of practice. So whenever you see them, they execute generic joint venture agreements. These joint venture agreements that are so generic, they lack context, right? And there are a lot of issues that are usually outstanding, governance issues, when to provide funding, how to provide funding in a manner consistent with the life of the project. You know, how do you, what grace period is it you are creating for a breach of a term of the contract? What is a material term that's not supposed to be breached? How do you terminate? And when you terminate, how do you, you know, step in? What do you do to manage all of these relationships? You see that it's nuanced. So most real estate developers do not think about it this way. They just get a small joint venture agreement and they execute and they sign their future away. So that is the reality. So you also need to be careful of that. We are not talking about 300-page documentation. It's not about the bulkiness of the document. It's just about ensuring that it is context, it is rich in context, and you know all the usual issues that apply in joint venture agreement or BOT arrangements. They are, you know, well documented. You understand what I'm saying? So another issue, and I think the last one I'm going to talk about, is structuring. Structuring. You need to structure real estate development effectively. You need to structure it effectively. If you do not structure real estate development effectively, you are going to get serious tax exposure. Serious tax exposure. And it will be hard, incredibly hard, to manage relationship between stakeholders. And I'm going to give you another example. This property is a property in Ikoyi. The family, it's a family company. The family company, you know, owns the land. And the desire of the family is that we want to develop this property, partner with someone to develop this property, but we want our father's retirement home to also be in this property. Of course, that means that there's a joint development or joint venture arrangement, right? And the developers are part of the joint venture, of course. So they are, you know, having a building that there's like 5 floors, 2 flats on each floor. That's like nine apartments plus the retirement home. Now you have the owner of the property in the home. That means that there are some things he likes, there are some things he doesn't like, and you need to bring that into the rules and regulations. Do you understand? You understand the diversity of the issues. So what we did was to say, okay, how do we manage the tax exposure? How do we manage the relationship? Okay, there is already an SPV that owns the property, right? Increase the share capital of the SPV. Bring in the developers. Let them own shares in the company on a unit by unit basis, right? To regulate the relationship between the developer and the owner of the property. You have a pre-commissioning shareholders agreement. That pre-commissioning shareholders agreement, you know, regulated the relationship from the point of signing to the point where the property was constructed, the completion of construction. So now we are done with construction. Okay, how do these off-takers, how do they take the property? You have a post-commissioning shareholders agreement, which makes every off-taker a shareholder and a director in the company. You know, you are not, as an off-taker or as a new apartment owner, you are not going to perfect your title at the lands registry again or at the lands bureau again. What you have is that you have a stake in the company that owns the property. So at the end of the day, when you want to extend or renew the right of occupancy, you are coming together as a group, you share the costs, right? And when you want to sell to another person, it's a matter of share transfer. You understand? So it really goes to the structuring. And to answer the last question, how do we, mitigate all of this risk? Include us early, as your lawyers. Include us early. That is the way we know the terrain. We've been in the system for a long time, and we know the system. We know the structures that work. So include us as you know. Include us as you're very early. We flag it, we structure it, and get the deal done.
Thank you very much, Rajib. Yeah, so very, very helpful mitigation tactics. Also, like clear documentation. You can't have everything in writing. You can't overemphasize the importance of having things in writing and things being vetted by your legal counsel. I'm going to go back to Spacecube before going to Cutstruct. So we've talked about formal issues, right? Legal, commercial documentation. How do you deal with informal realities? Because we're in Nigeria, we have so many things that are unusual for other jurisdictions, like omoniles, family land dynamics, community interest. How do you deal with all the things? Because as a developer, right, you have more experience dealing with that, with those stakeholders. So how do you deal with those stakeholders? And also you can give us practical examples so that people can also relate to how to deal with the stakeholders.
All right, thank you. So first of all, who are your stakeholders? Like you said, I'm trying to use legalese. Let me speak Nigerian language.
No, speak freely, please. Yes.
Yeah, so your stakeholders, number one, are the omoniles. Omoniles meaning the people that sold the land to you. So they've sold land to you, but you should know that in Nigeria, selling land to you is not the end of business. You are going to keep paying them for a long time in different ways. So that's number one. Number two, stakeholder set of stakeholders, the immediate community, the residents. In some areas outside Lagos, we have what they call, well, we also have them in Lagos, CDAs. We also have them in Lagos, but they are more prominent in certain other locations than in Lagos. In Lagos, it's more of residents associations and all that. But those people are also very important. Then because of the advent of we developers, us developers, the real estate company is also a stakeholder because in all sincerity, sometimes your real estate, the people buy land from to build, they are omoniles. There are real estate companies that are actually, I mean, to put it nicely, they are omonile companies. And then of course you have I'll just call it the people nearby. There's no name for them, but the people nearby, meaning the people, when you are going to do your due diligence, there are people you talk to and say, do you know Mr. ABC? Do you know this person? Are they real? Those people nearby, the person selling Boli at the junction. Some of us ignore them when we want to buy land. You need to talk to those people, buy Boli from them and ask them questions. If you don't eat Boli like me, just pack it one side. But I'm just saying you need to engage those those different categories. And there's a last example I mentioned, I forgot, your squatters. A lot of times you will have squatters on your land, especially if it's in an urban area, or I'll call it semi-urban, a satellite town. Yeah, so it means it's close enough to town and all that. This is very common in Abuja. We've experienced this with one. We've done about 4 farms. Well, a number of farms actually, but the one we did in Kuje, we had to settle the farm owner, the occupants who were farming, they were planting something else. I think groundnuts. We had to settle them twice. After the first negotiation, that is, you pay Mr. A for the land. You now pay his farmers to settle them and say, we want to start our own planting operations. In some cases, you meet people who are doing small scale, what's it called, mining. You know, they're just crushing small stones. Whatever it is, those people are your stakeholders. If they trouble you, I promise you, you may need to leave your land. I mean, there are people, and your squatters can also include people you think are normal, like religious organizations. And those religious organizations will tell you, no, the Lord has given us this land to possess. So you need to bear that in mind. These are the realities that we have faced and our friends and partners in the industry have faced. So I've mentioned the one of Kuje as an example. There's a place where we're developing for ourselves, and we'll make an announcement on that very soon. And in the process of our conversation, we had to, so I'm trying to talk about solutions rather than just the stories. We had to ensure that these guys are going to handle their omoniles because they've held the land for up to 20 years. They know the omoniles and all of that. So the omoniles will collect money for foundation, for roofing, for every floor you cast. I'm sorry, but this is Nigeria. I don't argue with them. Just like if you go to Brazil, if you want to build around the favelas, I'm sorry, you are going to be nice to those guys there, right? So there's a version of them in every society, just that ours, we call them what we call them. So we negotiate, our current negotiation with them is that you guys are going, if the omoniles are charging 200 naira, 1,000 naira for foundation, roof, and all of that, making 1 million naira per building, we are structuring that into our negotiation with them so that they introduce us to the omoniles first of all, and they say, oh, it is these people that gave you this money. Then we also have some amount we give to them so that at the end, these original sellers have given them something. Ourselves as the new stakeholders have also given them something. And in this particular case, we're even considering keeping the name of that organization because it is that name that's kept the omoniles sane. I will not be able to divulge details, but let's use a random example. Let's say you buy a land from the Nigerian Army, from one of the cooperative societies belonging to the Nigerian Army. If you're a developer, I believe you'll be wise to keep your estate named Nigerian Army estates so that because they fear the Nigerian Army, but they don't fear you. So we have something similar, not exactly like that, but something similar, such an arrangement. So I'm just mentioning that as a solution that you can explore. So ensure the seller retains retains communication, and of course, make sure they have skin in the game. You don't want someone to sell land. In fact, anybody who sells land to you and runs away is no longer a stakeholder. When he sells land to you, our lawyers will always tell you, you don't pay for all your land immediately. So if you are paying 50 million or like the example Mujib mentioned earlier, you don't pay all of the money at once. You pay via installment so that if there's trouble, they share in the trouble. And of course, when things turn out well, you are nice to them, and of course, they get their full payment. So I'm trying not to elongate the answer, but you just need to make sure that your stakeholders, know your stakeholders, number one, and make sure that as much as possible, cooperate with them, and make sure the seller is in the game. Make sure the seller does not abandon you. That's the summary. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Testimony, for giving us those insights, because I'm always like very concerned dealing with all the various stakeholders when you're doing a real estate development. But you've given us very good tips that everybody can apply, from investors to also the developers. So, Dr. Eze, what role does Cutstruct play when you're insulating a project from supply chain vulnerabilities? So you mentioned that the sudden shift from like price of cement affected like a project. How do you then ensure that when you're doing a project, like even if there are these issues, or there are switches in between, inflation, etc., how do you then ensure that those issues are contained, it does not shake up the project or even end the project, and also using technology as well? So you can give us some examples.
Okay, all right. So thank you. So For real estate, housing or construction, basically in Nigeria, we from a material point of view, we are dealing with three risks actually. You are dealing with price uncertainty, volatility that can change, and a lot of things drive this price. It's not just because price of cement have increased. It could be the transportation, the logistic cost that actually affect it. There is unreliability from the suppliers or vendors. And of course, there is quality inconsistency. So I didn't use low quality, very specific. So it does have, most times when you get materials, especially from the local source, it's not the issue of whether the material is of good quality. At times you see that there are no consistencies in the material from the color, from the dimension, from the thickness. There seems to be no uniformity. You can buy um, tiles, for example, and as you are laying the tiles, suddenly you will see different shades of colors, especially when you get there. So these things are the risk that we face from a supply chain point of view. So what Cutstruct platform does is to put this thing into an interface that you can manage and such that you are able to reduce the risk. Firstly, you can eliminate risk, but you are able to reduce the risk to a point where you can manage it. And how does that happen? We connect you to verified suppliers. We ensure that, of course, because they are verified, we're having consistency in terms of delivery, in terms of the material sizing, color specification, and all that. And then you have lock-in price because we're able to give you a window. So to say in the next 3 months, price is locked at this amount, allowing you to plan. It gives you credibility to plan. But ultimately, what we are doing at the end of the day, because in all this conversation we're having, be it supply chain, be it readiness from a point of legal documentation, due diligence, feasibility study, it's because you want to attract finance. Either you want some investors, maybe you're running a JV or you're approaching a financing organization to provide finance from you, or you even have an angel investor a family member who wants to give money. But you need to see some level of trust, and that's what we were helping you to do. So over time, as you use the platform to manage your supply chain, you are building enough data that will enable you to make such decisions. So, for example, you will be able to know that what is happening in price fluctuation is not necessarily the price of the material, but the cost of transportation. So when you have those data, how do you use that to enhance your next project? That will help you to enhance your decision you're making in your next project to know that, okay, am I really getting this thing from the right source? Maybe I need to change my supply. I need to find a location that is more accessible, where delivery will be cheaper, and then you can have a robust supply chain framework that can help you to do your work. So that's what we do basically. In terms of practical examples, just as I gave, if you are, the most dangerous things you find out is when we say, we sort it out when we get there. That seems to be the norm when we are working on projects. But when you have these things done from the onset, as I said in my first question, when I said this is not supposed to be a decision that you would take at the middle of the project, decision that you take at the beginning of the project, you discover that you have a seamless delivery of your project. You have price that are well managed, and then you are not taken by surprise. And then you also have consistency in your delivery. So you are able to price, define your market and price. So if, for example, I'm targeting the low end of the market, you are able to price appropriately the right of materials you need to use, you source them, and you ensure that they're of good quality, and you deliver on time, and you don't get unnecessary price fluctuation that will affect you. You are able to hedge against all this risk. That's what the platform does for you. That's what Cutstruct actually use technology to enable how you make those decisions.
Thank you very much. Dr. Easy, thank you so much for that response. So moving on to the next phase, I mean, from this phase, we've kind of merged phases 2 and 3 together in terms of your transaction structure and also your pre-construction thinking. And we've kind of dealt with all of that under phase 2. So phase 3 talks about your regulatory approvals and construction. And then for Spacecube testimony, what stage do you actually begin to prioritize regulatory approvals? Are you supposed to get approval before you start constructing, or do you do your approvals when you've laid the foundation? You will not start getting approvals. When are you supposed to get regulatory approvals, or when do they become priority for you in the development?
All right. Yes. Definitely not when you lead your foundation. Otherwise, you're in contravention already and you pay fines. So except you're happy to pay fines. There are fines that you pay to the government of Lagos that sometimes can actually build houses. I'm not even exaggerating. Even in the FCT, Ogun State is also following that trend. River State too. Yeah, I can say so. Don't lay foundation first. Don't. The moment you are dreaming of starting a project, start thinking of approval. That's the short and simple answer. The moment you think, okay, I want to do a block of flats. Like I said, we wanted to do a block of flats somewhere around Mowe. We did not even bother to. I mean, of course, we are architects we have architects in our firm. I mean, so we have resident architects. I mean, so we already had drawings. So we just took those drawings to the people and put them on the site plan and said, does this work in Ogun State? Does this work in this location? And they told us what they would tell us. That's what you should do. So it's not that you have bought the land and before you buy the land, start finding out what are the regulatory requirements for this location. If you are buying land by the water, anywhere, when I say water, anywhere, I mean even if it's by River Niger, River Benue, there are some requirements. In fact, there are some licenses, especially if it's industrial, that there are some permits, not licenses, that you must take from the Inland Waterways Authority, for example, if it's around Benue or River or Niger State. So you need to start doing those things from the dream phase while it's still a dream, before you even get into engaging your what do you call these guys, your professionals. You need to already start doing that. And that's the point of environmental impact assessment, the point of they call it our ARAP. I forgot what they call that. There are a couple of documents that go along with drawings that talk about the impact. Apart from EIA, there's a second and third one. I can't remember the names. All of those things, they happen while the thing is still a dream in your head. So I think that's the simple and straight answer to that.
Thank you very much, Testimony. So Mujib, what are these regulatory approvals? Testimony has told us that we need to get our approvals. Well, even when we're still dreaming about it, but what are the regulatory approvals that are applicable? You can talk about common ones so that we don't specialize on just one type of development.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I believe Lagos is the standard in constructions, and I'm going to use the Lagos standard to answer that question. In terms of the approvals you need, it really sometimes it depends on the nature of the property. If you have a property that has a lot of trees, if you have a property that has not been fenced, if you have a property that has, a building in it, the nature of the approvals you'll be seeking will be different. So if you have a property that has trees in it, then you have to, approach the last park, Lagos State Parks, and I think Recreational Areas Agency, for an authorization to fell trees, tree felling authorization. Then you have to also, if it's a property that there's already a structure on it, you have to demolish. So you have to approach the Lagos State Fiscal Planning Permit Authority for a demolition permit. Then you get a demolition approval or authorization from the Lagos State Building Control Agency afterwards. But in terms of general construction, of course, you will need a development permit. which would be the basis for your construction. That's when you front load all your architectural drawings and everything to the planning authority, and it will be the basis for which they will approve that development permit. And it usually comes with some restrictions or some time limits. In Lagos here, I know within 2 years, once it is approved, you have to complete your construction. So then afterwards, you have your authorization to commence construction or authorization to commence building. Then after you're done with the whole construction, you now have a certificate. You apply for a certificate of fitness for habitation. So the reality is that when you apply for these things, you still have to consider the neighborhood that you are in and the designated use of the property. Of course, in Lagos, like I mentioned, you can still redesignate the property use, right? But when you are doing all of that, you have to, most of the time, they'll tell you at last part that you have to approach the community residents, their association, to get their consent. You know, there's a property in Ikoyi along Grumans Road that we had to, you know, it's in a residential area. We had to designate, and we had to seek the consent of the community residents association. So that's how it works. So in terms of how you structure it, you have to treat it as timelines. You know outrightly the nature of the property and what you want to do. Then you start to bring everything in and say, oh, okay, at what point do I start construction? Do I start? You can't start construction if you have not commenced your perfection process. There's a process for perfection of your title, right? The basis for issuance of a development permit is that you have a title to the property. But because Lagos state governments and I believe many other state governments are now moving to e-land administration portals, they're having teething problems, right? It can be slow sometimes, can be frustrating. They now say, oh, look, what you do is that when you reach a stage in your application, then we tell the LASPA to give you authorization to go ahead with your construction, because at that stage we are sure that there is no other interest that is, you know, likely to defeat your interest. It's about structuring. It's about treating it as timelines, but you don't get to structure and treat it as timelines if you don't involve lawyers early.
Thank you very much, Mujib, for giving us an insight as to key regulatory approvals and how it can be structured. So like Mujib said, you're essentially going to build your project and your timelines and fit in the regulatory approvals at the right stages. And that's what lawyers help you do, as well as your construction experts. They'll be able to tell you this is when you submit your perfection, this is when you'll be able to get your development permit, this is when you need to get demolition, etc. So everything just falls into place in your project life cycle. But it's not something that you should keep on the back end, because like as testimony said, you can't even lay your foundation without regulatory approval. So it's very, very, very key. So for to Spacecube before we go back to Cutstruct. When construction begins and when phase 5, which is project delivery, and then also your technological interventions, when construction begins, what are the most difficult risks, like from your experience, that you've been unable or that hard to control? And then how do you then manage those risks? So you mentioned so many things, but like once you already started construction, right? Maybe you've planned, you involved your lawyers, you've got your regulatory approval, you've now started construction. What are the things that can still happen even when you've checked or you've ticked all the boxes, as we've already said, for the previous phases before this final phase?
Okay. To start with, regulatory, I'll call it heavy-handed regulatory heavy high-handedness. I think that's what they call it. Yeah, so we were once on a site somewhere in Ikorodu, and someone we got the approval, we did all the right stuff, and someone just showed up on site and showed his power to avoid going into too many details, and just shut down the site. I mean, this is normally, you know, you are supposed to invite them after you've gotten the authorization to build. that's not the name, but authorization to build, that's after the permit is given, the green sticker and all of those documents in Lagos, and you've gotten all that and you are starting work and you have reached, I think we did the first slab. And while we're pouring, before we did the other one, was when they just came in and said, oh, you people have flouted. And we said, which of your laws did we flout? What exactly did we do wrong? And at the end of the day, you can all imagine what ended it. I will not go into details, but you can imagine what it was. And I'll give you a hint. It was around a festive period. So somebody just needed to buy something for the family. These are real challenges that we face. So sometimes you cannot control that. That's why sometimes when you see a site shut down, well, of course, you may have flouted some things, but sometimes it's not really that. Sometimes it's just somebody needs to have lunch on your head. So, but the good thing is once you have all your papers and you've managed your way out of that, they will let you continue. They are not going to stop you. That's number one. Number two, of course, weather and all of those things. Sometimes the weather forecast is sometimes wrong, and we do a lot of concrete construction in Nigeria. Hopefully we'll be doing, we do a lot of in situ concrete. Normally we should do, if we had a properly industrialized system, we'll do a lot of precast. And of course, with precast, you can avoid some weather conditions. So weather is obviously not always your friend. And of course, you can get into trouble with, there are times where we've had to use security to pull people off site, workers, because people just behave outrageously, and sometimes it's for whatever reason. So sometimes we just have labor that is not that is not behaving well in simple English. So yeah, those are things that come up. The other thing is supply. That is the biggest one, but I don't want to get into Cutstruct's business because it's a huge deal.
Dr. Eze will give his own perspective.
Yeah, so sometimes in fact, there was a time we had to use, there's waterproof cement from this brand. We're not mentioning brand names. So we had to use waterproof cement, which is plus 2,000 more than normal cement. At that time, anyway, I don't know about now. And we had to use that to do certain things because our regular cement could not come into our site. And you don't even want to know what happened to cement that month. And this is just last year. I'm not talking 5 years ago. So yeah, these things happen, and sometimes you just have to improvise. Sometimes you have to buy more than you need. Sometimes, a lot of these things, of course, security is another challenge. We've done projects in Edo State where in fact, we have a project right now where security is you need soldiers on site to simplify it. Yeah. So the one we did in Edo State, security was a big deal, but thankfully, you can see my face, so I'm still alive. So these are the challenges that we face, and they are surmountable, but sometimes they are really not things you can plan your way around sometimes.
That's very good. Thank you, Testimony. I think from what I can gather is, so there are risks that you cannot avoid, you can't plan for. But then if you have your team in place, you've covered, or you've dotted, or you've ticked all your boxes, and you have things in place, working with proper like lawyers, construction experts, supply chain experts, then you'll be able to resolve those issues as they come up. Not that they wouldn't come up or that they wouldn't happen, but you'll be able to resolve them and then come out of them. A lot of the things that Testimony has mentioned are peculiar to the Nigerian landscape, and maybe also not very peculiar, but in various forms in other jurisdictions. And it's something that most of us are aware of, and even if we don't, or we've not experienced it, that you've heard about it. So Dr. Eze, from a supply chain perspective, how do you deal with the risks that Testimony mentioned? Actually, you mentioned supply, so it's going to leave it to you to talk to us about. So how do you deal with these things when they come up, when you already started construction and suddenly cement is 10 times the current amount or the amount you planned for? Then how do you deal with all of these things?
Okay, correct. Thank you. So, and that was why when we started